Chapter 30. Thursday was the first day of Rachel's trial. Months had passed since her arrest. These were months of legal preparation and relentless media speculation. And it was not about evidence, but about strategy. Today, the evidence would begin. Back in Stonebridge, the holding area was eerily quiet, save for the occasional clang of metal doors and the low hum of other female inmates. Rachel sat motionless on the hard bench. She hadn't slept much. Her thoughts drifted to him. Even in death, Edward haunted her. His face, his voice, the look of pain when he hit the floor. She squeezed her eyes shut. None of it felt real. The echo of footsteps snapped her back to the present. Kate Jones approached cautiously, her expression a mixture of worry and quiet solidarity. Her only friend at Stonebridge, a fellow inmate bound together by the cold, stark walls. "Hello, my lovely." Kate's voice was warm but tinged with concern. Rachel forced a smile. "Hey." "Did you get much sleep?" Kate asked. Rachel didn't need to answer. The dark circles beneath her eyes told the truth. She shook her head, unable to form the words. Instead, she sagged. Kate slid next to her on the bench and wrapped an arm around her. Rachel leaned in and rested her head against her friend's shoulder. "I'm scared," she whispered. The words barely escaped her lips and carried the full weight of her anguish. "Even though I know I deserve to be here, there's no excuse for what I did to him." Kate scoffed. "Don't be silly, darling. There was no motive. You didn't wake up and plan to off him. It was a horrible mistake, something that could happen to anyone." Rachel flinched. "But they say I did it for the money. #Rachel the gold digger." Kate clicked her tongue in irritation. "Haters. That's all they are. Bitter people looking for someone to crucify. They're jealous because you stand to inherit a fortune." Rachel swallowed hard, her voice cracked. "But I don't want it." Kate softened. "I know you don't, but this is not about you. It's his baby too," she said softly, nodding down at the bump. A silence fell between them. "The baby deserves what the baby deserves. This isn't just about you anymore," Kate added. Rachel pressed a hand to her stomach. "I owe it to the baby to fight. I owe it to Edward." The baby kicked at that thought. Kate squeezed her hand. "You're lucky you agreed to go with Emmanuel. It means you have a shot at a normal life for your child." Rachel nodded weakly, though the small, fleeting smile she offered was filled with resignation. Deep down, she felt she knew what the verdict would be. No amount of kindness, no amount of sympathy would change the inevitability of what was coming. She didn't think even the best defense from Emmanuel could perform that miracle. A few minutes later, Tom Daniels appeared. "Let's go," he said gently. Having witnessed the exchange between Edward and Rachel, he had not really been the same. Rachel was booked out, and as she stepped into the blinding midday light, the real punishment began. The press had arrived in force. As much as she expected the barrage, it still left her flustered. The shouts began instantly. "Why did you do it, Rachel? Was it jealousy? Did you plan it?" She kept her head down. Tom shielded her as best he could and guided her towards a waiting van. Inside, she let out a shaky breath. The chaos was muffled, but the echoes of their words rang in her ears. As they drove through, reporters swarmed around, trying to get a shot of her through the windows until the driver found a clearing and sped off. The city blurred past her, but she barely noticed. Her fate awaited her in the courtroom. The moment she stepped out of the van, the media was there again. The same barrage of questions, flashing camera lights, and the same type of people clamored to get a shot of her. Inside the courtroom, there were journalists, sketch artists, spectators, and the curious. Rachel felt a pit open in her stomach. In the gallery, Edward Hale and Charlotte sat together, and it was impossible to miss the animosity which radiated from Catherine towards both Rachel and her bump. Gerald Thornton strode into the courtroom. His sharp cheekbones caught the morning light filtering through the windows, accentuating a face honed by years of courtroom battles. His sleek dark hair framed his chiseled features with just the right amount of carelessness to suggest he didn't need to try too hard. His striking green eyes scanned the room and missed nothing. He wore a tailored navy suit that molded effortlessly to his lean frame. Tucked under one arm was a thick case file, while the other hand clutched a leather-bound notebook, its edges worn from constant use. When he reached the bench, he didn't sit right away. He paused, shoulders squared, his pen tapping thoughtfully against the pad, as if already mapping out the dismantling of the defense. Thornton wasn't just a prosecutor, he was a tactician. He understood the nuances of the courthouse and used them to his advantage. And today, Rachael Brown was his opponent. The courtroom buzzed with tension, a suffocating mix of anticipation and barely concealed judgment. Then the court superintendent's voice rang out. "All rise for the Honourable Judge Olam." The room rose collectively. Judge Olam entered. He took his seat and adjusted his robes. "The court is now in session," his voice echoed across the chamber. "Bring the jury in," he ordered the court attendant, gesturing for them to enter. The jury, now dubbed the Edwardian 12 by the press, shuffled into the jury box. The looks on their faces ranged from detached disinterest to quiet fascination. Some crossed their legs, some looked as though they had been forced into civic duty. Others were eager to absorb every detail. Rachel couldn't help but let her gaze drift over them. Some black, some white, some Asian, with different demographics in terms of age and status. Her heart skipped a beat. Would they see her at all? Her stomach lurched as she fought to maintain her balance. Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted by the booming voice of Judge Olam. "Members of the jury, the prosecution bears the burden of proving the guilt of the defendant beyond a reasonable doubt. If there is any reasonable doubt, you must find her not guilty." He continued, "In the case of The Crown versus Rachael Brown." Judge Olam's gaze flicked towards Gerald. "Is the Crown prosecution ready?" Gerald Thornton stood and buttoned his navy suit in one smooth motion. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge turned to the defense. "Is the defense ready?" Emmanuel rose, composed. "Yes, Your Honor." "Then let us proceed. Let the Crown give its opening statement," he said, gesturing to Gerald. Gerald Thornton rose with deliberate calm and delivered an opening, walking the jury carefully through the final hours leading up to the incident. A possible argument overheard, a kitchen knife retrieved, a single decisive act that could not be undone. This, he argued, was not panic. It was not confusion. It was domestic violence. He reminded the jury that Edward Hale had been unarmed, that the wound was delivered with force, aimed perilously close to the heart, that after the blade struck, it was Edward, not Rachel, who collapsed, bleeding, fighting to breathe. "The Crown will show," Thornton said evenly, "that this was not an accident, nor a moment of dissociation, but a conscious choice, a domestic act of violence carried out by someone who lost control." By the time he sat down, the narrative was clear. This was a woman who crossed the line and could not step back from it. Emmanuel countered, depicting Rachel as a woman drowning in tragedy, caught in circumstances far beyond her control. The first witness was called. Dr. Kendall, a forensic scientist well known in the legal world for giving expert advice on the science behind DNA, stepped into the witness box, adjusted his tie, and was sworn in. "Dr. Kendall, please introduce yourself to the court," Gerald prompted. I am a forensic scientist with a doctorate in forensic science and have spent the last 20 years in this field. Just out of interest, Dr. Kendall, where did you obtain your PhD, please? Cambridge, the doctor responded. Now I am impressed. What an achievement, Dr. Kendall, Gerald enthused. Thank you, Dr. Kendall replied, simply with humility. And how many cases have you worked on throughout your career? 382. And in these cases, what is your role? My role is to analyze the evidence and report only what the crime scene reveals. Thornton nodded approvingly. Please describe the crime scene in this case. Dr. Kendall's voice remained steady. The scene was a busy kitchen. A significant pool of blood was found at the center of the room. No visible signs of struggle were apparent, but there were indications of attempted resuscitation. A 4-inch blade used in the attack was found at the scene. Emmanuel immediately rose. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. Judge Olam barely hesitated. Sustained. The jury will disregard the witness's statement about the blade used in the attack, as that has not been established yet. Thornton rephrased. Dr. Kendall, based on your analysis, what do you believe happened to the victim? Dr. Kendall adjusted his glasses. I believe the 4-inch blade, consistent with the knife found in the kitchen, pierced the victim's heart in a single stroke. And what did the evidence reveal about the knife? The defendant's DNA and fingerprints were found on the handle. Gerald Thornton allowed the weight of the statement to settle. No further questions, he said, stepping back. Your witness. Dr. Kendall, in your opinion, is it possible that the defendant did not intend to kill her husband? Emmanuel asked. Objection. Cause for speculation, Your Honor. Gerald's voice sliced through the air. Judge Olam raised a hand before Gerald could continue. The witness is being asked for an expert opinion within his field of study, not a legal conclusion. Objection overruled. A ripple moved through the jury box, subtle but not missed by either legal team. Lance leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowed with fresh curiosity. Gerald's face tense with frustration as he sat down, seething. Emmanuel pressed on. In your experience and opinion, Dr. Kendall, given the absence of defensive wounds, could this suggest that the act was not premeditated, but rather a tragic accident triggered by an event such as PTSD? Reasonable doubt. Emmanuel was laying the foundation. All eyes turned to the witness box. Even the stenographer's machine seemed to pause mid-stroke. Dr. Kendall hesitated, his gaze flicking briefly towards the jury, as though weighing the consequences of each possible word. At last, he exhaled. Maybe. I can't really say what her intent was. The response was soft, uncertain, and sent a ripple of murmurs through the public gallery. Gerald's jaw tightened, a muscle twitched with barely restrained irritation. The faintest flicker of triumph crossed Emmanuel's features before he masked it beneath his usual calm. With nothing further to add, Dr. Kendall stepped down and returned to his seat as the judge announced a brief recess. Rachael did not move. She remained perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes unfocused, staring into an empty point somewhere far beyond the courtroom's wooden panels. Emmanuel leaned towards her. Are you okay? He asked quietly. She barely nodded. I'm fine. But she wasn't. The weight pressing on her chest was suffocating, a grief so dense she could feel it in her bones. She desperately wished that Edward would be waiting for her outside the courthouse, that this nightmare would dissolve into a misunderstanding that could be undone. But it couldn't. Edward was gone because of her. Emmanuel lowered his voice. Hold it together. This is just the beginning. When the recess ended and the court reconvened after lunch, Judge Olam adjusted his glasses, surveyed the room with a steady gaze, and invited the prosecution to call their next witness. Gerald Thornton stood, his lips curled into a small, triumphant smile. He turned towards the entrance of the courtroom, and then he called a name that turned Rachel's blood to ice. Karen Smith. Dressed to impress in an Armani suit that hugged her figure perfectly, her 6-inch Prada heels clicked against the polished floor, and her face was immaculately covered with expertly applied makeup. Even if you didn't want to, you couldn't help but notice Karen Smith. The moment her sharp eyes landed on Rachel, the animosity was impossible to hide. The tension between the two women became obvious even to an untrained eye. The clerk swore Karen in. "Please state your name for the record," Gerald began. "Karen Smith? And what do you do for a living?" Karen lifted her chin. "I'm a full-time housewife." "So you're in the neighborhood most of the time?" "Yes, I take my dogs for walks, go for runs around the estate, and do my shopping, mostly local, except for larger trips." The prosecutor nodded. "Let's go to the evening of May the 25th at approximately 7:30 p.m. Can you describe what happened, please?" Karen sat up straighter, her tone shifting into well-rehearsed solemnity. "I was out on a run around the estate when I heard a scream from 34 Hill Close. I ran towards the sound and went inside. What I saw will stay with me for the rest of my life." A dramatic pause. "Could you elaborate, please, Mrs. Smith?" Karen swallowed. "There was blood. Edward was on the floor, clutching his side, bleeding out. And then, there she was." She turned her gaze to Rachel, her voice laced with disdain. "You mean Rachael Brown, the defendant?" Gerald asked. "Yes," Karen nodded. She stood over him, holding a knife. She didn't try to help him. She didn't call for help. She just stood there, blank, emotionless, like she didn't care that he was bleeding to death. Colour rose to her cheeks. "Charlotte called 999. I was scared Rachel could turn on me, so I ran out." The jury exchanged glances. Emmanuel stood smoothly. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation." Judge Olam barely hesitated. Sustained. The jury will disregard the statement about the defendant turning on her. Karen's lips pressed together. Her composure faltered for the first time, but she recovered quickly. "I mean, what kind of animal cold-bloodedly stabs their partner?" she added, her voice trembling with fury. "Objection!" Emmanuel's voice cut through the room, firmer now. "Sustained," Judge Olam said sharply. "The jury will strike that from the record." Karen folded her arms across her chest, but the prosecutor gave her a reassuring nod. "No further questions, Your Honor." He returned to his seat. Judge Olam turned to the defense. "Defense, do you wish to cross-examine the witness?" Emmanuel rose, calm and methodical. "Yes, Your Honor." He took his time walking towards the witness stand. "Ms. Smith, thank you for your testimony. What was your relationship with the victim?" Karen cocked her head slightly. "He was my neighbor. We were friends. Our families occasionally had dinner together." Emmanuel tilted his head. "Friends," he repeated slowly. "Did you have any other type of relationship with the victim?" Karen's posture stiffened. A hush rippled through the gallery. "No, nothing else," she said quickly. Emmanuel arched an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that, Miss Smith? Please think carefully before you respond. Did you ever have romantic feelings for the victim?" Karen's face drained of colour. She glanced briefly at the Crown prosecutor, but he avoided her gaze. I don't think that's relevant," she stammered. Emmanuel's voice remained cool. "Please answer the question, Mrs. Smith. I will determine what is and what isn't relevant." The courtroom held its breath. Karen fidgeted. A bead of sweat formed on her temple. Then, barely audible, She whispered, "Yes." Emmanuel leaned in slightly. "Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat it for the jury, please?" Karen's hands curled into fists. "Yes," she spat. A murmur rippled across the courtroom. Emmanuel didn't blink. "And did you ever contact the victim, asking him to leave my client, Rachael Brown, perhaps even promising to leave your own husband for him?" Karen's face burned a deep scarlet. She shifted in her seat, scratching the nape of her neck. The jury watched with renewed interest. Karen's eyes darted again towards the prosecutor. No rescue was coming. She was cornered. Then, with sudden frustration, she exploded. "She is the one on trial, not me. Hold her accountable." A couple of jurors gasped. Judge Olam's eyes darkened. "Miss Smith, restrain yourself, or I will hold you in contempt of court." Karen slumped, dejected and alone, the feeling she hated most. "Please answer my question, Miss Smith." "Objection," Gerald called out. "Relevance, Your Honor." "I want to establish that she had a personal vendetta against the defendant and will do or say anything against her. There is no credibility, Your Honor," Emmanuel replied quickly. "Sustained," the judge ruled. "She is not on trial here. Go easy, counselor." "Your Honor, I am done with this witness." The damage was done. It was unlikely Gerald could undo what Emmanuel had planted in the jury's minds. Still, Gerald stood and approached the witness box. "Miss Smith, to establish the facts of this case, do you believe the accused harmed the victim maliciously?" "Objection," Emmanuel called, leading the witness. "Sustained," Judge Olam ruled. The prosecutor nodded, adjusting quickly. "Miss Smith, did you see the accused holding a knife dripping with blood, standing over the victim?" Karen sat up, clinging to the lifeline. "Yes, I did. Rachael was standing over Edward, knife in hand, blood dripping from the blade." "And did she appear to have the intention to kill him?" "Objection, speculation," Emmanuel said smoothly. The judge hesitated. "I'll allow it." Karen's eyes flickered with renewed confidence. She had every intention of wanting to kill him. "And why do you believe that?" Karen's gaze hardened. If it was a mistake, she would have been crying. She would have called 999, but she didn't. She just stood there, staring at him. No emotion, no remorse. The Crown prosecutor nodded, satisfied. "Thank you, Miss Smith. No further questions." Job done. As Karen stepped down, the jury's expressions were mixed. Some nodded subtly at her final statement. Others still looked skeptical. The earlier shock still lingered. Emmanuel remained impassive. Rachael watched Karen leave the stand. Her perfectly composed facade wasn't so perfect anymore. "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." John 10:10.